Hello again, welcome to a special edition of CropLife Retail Week. I'm Eric Sfiligoj, editor of CropLife magazine, here today with our special guest, Ken Zuckerberg from CoBank. Ken, welcome.
Thanks, Eric. Great to be with you today.
So we're having you on today because, again, we've recently started a new section in our e-newsletter and on our website called Retail Remedies, where basically we're looking at these uncertain times and we're trying to offer some potential solutions for ag retailers and growers that they can maybe employ in their businesses to get us through what we're dealing with here in 2022. So again, Ken, the reason I wanted to have you on today is I know about 7 or so weeks ago, we gathered together at the EFC Systems Summit, and you gave a nice presentation kind of on current events in the world and for agriculture in particular. And obviously a lot has changed. But if you could, first off, just if you could review for our viewers, you were talking about the five market drivers, I guess you would call them. So if you could review those 5 based on what you had said back about 7 weeks ago, and then we'll dive forward what's changed since.
That sounds great, Eric. I appreciate the kind words about the presentations, and now you'll have to test my memory how good I am for remembering 7 weeks back in time. So one of the I guess the focus on the, if you will, the disruptive trends that I was talking about is that, look, there's at least 5, maybe more broad scale trends that we're seeing across the marketplace. And these trends really, some of which are structural in terms of society and commerce, and others really relate right to ag. Let me just summarize it for you, and then we can get into some of the meat of what you'd like to talk about. One of the trends was that major global power shifts are underway, and we talked about how in the last 3-4 decades, China has risen to be one of the largest, if not the largest, global economy and a large trading partner. Let me be clear, the US until 2025 is still expected to dominate, but after 2030, China will be the largest global economy and the largest trading partner, and that has huge ramifications to ag retail and US ag in general. I also signaled at that time that the geopolitical risks have increased, and I think, as I recall, I had a Newsweek cover that had a picture of a MiG in the danger zone, thinking about Russia, Ukraine, and also China, Taiwan. Obviously, after that meeting, Russia invaded Ukraine, and that's been consuming all of our time for the last couple months. Another trend, number 2, was severe weather patterns. These have accelerated, will continue to, in our view. And I called out a few things, if you will. Severe weather. We had Hurricane Ida in 2021, a tornado in Kentucky in 2021, the Iowa derecho, excess heat, extreme temperature. The interesting thing about climate change is it's not just hot. There's shock periods of cold as well that impact farming, and that's something we see continuing. Embedded in the changing temperature and changing climate, one has to think about water security and drought, and water risk is growing across the world. Drought has been front and center with US farming now for a couple of years. Demographics, we all know there are demographic shifts ranging from changing consumer preferences to increased urbanization, more folks living in city centers. I live outside of New York City, and for many years, people used to think about urbanization as just being moving to New York or San Francisco or Los Angeles. That's not really the case. We're talking Kansas City and St. Louis and Austin, Texas, Louisville, Kentucky, Cleveland, Ohio, Columbus. I mean, you have areas of folk that are coming to the cities to work. And interestingly, it's not just working folk, it's retirees that decide, okay, I'm sick and tired of cleaning up the lawn. I'm going to move to the city for my retirement years. This is a major shift. It's a major shift in terms of where food is produced and how you deliver it. And these are some things we've been thinking about. Plant-based protein is another dynamic on there. Different diets, different preferences, etc. Trends 4 and 5, Eric, if you'll recall, I talked a little bit about the global energy transition that's happening, and that is towards more renewable, sustainable fuel. Ethanol has been with us for a while. It's a great product. It helps reduce car emissions, but we also have renewable diesel, which is a soybean-based product. And what's interesting about this is that renewable diesel, with all the projects announced, we're talking 6.5 billion of renewable diesel, 6.5 billion gallons of renewable diesel being talked about up and running by 2025. That would take and consume virtually every soybean that we produce today. So that's a disruptive trend that we're going to have to figure out. And then, of course, finally, is robotics and automation. We're starting to see commercialization at scale, whether it be John Deere's autonomous tractors, American Vanguard, SIMPAS, advanced variable rate spraying, drones, the Rantizo products. There's lots of different products that are coming into American farming. So I threw a lot at you, but that's maybe a small recap of some of the subjects we talked about 2 months ago.
Right. And of course, like I said, Ken, I mean, of these 5 points that you were bringing up in your presentation, 4 of them still are pretty much the way they were when we saw each other last 7 weeks ago. But I guess the one that went from the hypothetical to the factual, unfortunately, was the Russia invasion of Ukraine. So based on that happening, I mean, what perceptions that you hit us with back in February in Nashville have you had to alter, and how is that impacting the market?
Yeah, well, the perceptions and what I was thinking pre-event versus post-event, I guess it really accelerated that, Eric. So I started doing some of the backbone research before, and I guess probably the best thing I could do is share what we recently published in a report, trying to think about the situation from a grain standpoint. The report we did entitled Ukraine Grain, Tight Stocks and Price Volatility Likely for Years. What we essentially did was talk about the key issues of what we knew as of the end of March, which the same issues are with us today. The base case assumes that Ukraine spring corn, that corn crop will be much smaller. There will be a wheat harvest this summer based on our current thinking, however, likely to be perhaps lower than expected, and definitely smaller wheat plantings in the fall. Net, as we sort of squared the triangle, if you will, we see both tightening of stocks to use in both wheat and corn going forward. And the numbers we used in the report, what we did is we backed out China and we backed out Ukraine to think about where global stocks to use could go. Backing those out, sort of thinking China is a place that they produce a lot of corn, however, they retain a lot. So the numbers in the report may look a little lower than USDA, but net, what we define as available stocks to use, it's going down from 6.6% to 4% for corn. Again, the available ex-China, ex-Ukraine, and for wheat, 15% to 10.5%. You've seen prices gyrate in both crops, and not for nothing, the recent USDA report did not show a huge amount of wheat acres. In fact, relative to expectations, wheat acres were smaller, corn acres were smaller, soybean acres were higher than expectation. So we have an interesting dynamic that feeds into the high fertilizer costs, also feeds into the fact that lower wheat planting has to do with the drought and the soil being real dry and maybe not as productive. So we're in an environment here where we see puts and takes and volatility happening because of the war, but then also some volatility happening with some of those factors I talked about, the severe weather and or drought, and certainly changing the geopolitical situation.
Okay, well, Ken, good. You gave me a nice synopsis there for, of course, the grain side, which is where most folks know the Ukrainian part of the situation. I mean, this equation comes into play. But of course, I know, having seen several presentations during the winter months, Russia is a pretty big supplier of fertilizer for the world. And, I keep reading about, basically, nations are pulling back on buying products from Russia, either voluntarily or through sanctions. I haven't heard anything about any sanctions on the fertilizer supply, but I'm sure there's some voluntary, there's companies that probably are choosing not to do business with Russia right now. So give us a little bit of background on what percentages we're talking here, what fertilizer products, and then, going forward, where the supply may come from if Russia is a non-starter for folks.
So first, what's always been present for the past at least decade, but again, none of us focus on critical concentration of risk oftentimes until we, have to. And the fact that Russia is, so very large in fertilizer production as well as energy, this really came to bear with, at the outset of this crisis. Moving into sort of specifics, and as we, think about what to do and what will come next, my chart here broke it down by specific nutrient. So in AN, Russia, at least as far as last year's percentage of trade, Russia had 48% of ammonium nitrate, 24% of ammonia. We had Ukraine with a very small amount of those two. When you get to the potash situation, Ukraine's about 14, Russia's 15. So there's a huge amount of potash coming from that part of the world. DAP and MAP, which are phosphate products, as you know, Russia is 12%, Ukraine's de minimis in that. And UAN, urea ammonium nitrate, that's a big product and it's a big number. Russia at 25% versus, and Ukraine at 0. So what you have to just do is step back for a second and say, boy, Russia has an outsized market share in the fertilizer space. And Russia, Ukraine have a very large, if not outside share of wheat exports, plus energy, plus a lot of the metals and other commodities that you've seen non-agriculture folks writing about for a while. So this situation of, when you have the product, you may control terms of trade. Well, terms of trade are going against them, to be sure, with the sanctions. However, what I worry about most, and it's not for this season, I think this season, the US co-ops that CoBank has the privilege to work with, they're generally in very good shape. But what I worry about is the war's not going so well for Russia. They're sitting on a lot of this fertilizer, fall 2023 and fall 2022, spring 2023. It's risky, right? So what I'm looking at and focused on is, what is the ability for, Nutrien through its acquisition of Potash Corp of Saskatchewan? What's their ability to ramp up production? What's the ability for CF Industries and Mosaic to at least source or produce product in the United States or in friendly territories and bring it to farmers? A lot of questions, probably more questions, Eric, than answers, but these are some of the companies that I'm, monitoring pretty closely, I'm sure as your clients are as well, to see how much can we make up, and can we do this in a way that's cost effective? Right now, fertilizer prices are still going up. So, the good news is there is product now, but the bad news is prices and availability are in question.
Well, and I know, again, like I mentioned, hearing presentations throughout the winter months, I know a lot of the folks at the time were, looking at the projections the USDA was putting out regarding the crop mix here in the States. And the early projections were, corn would be up, soybean would be down, wheat and cotton would be basically flat.
Right.
But then when the numbers came out on March 31st, lo and behold, we had corn acreage down 4%, soybean up 4%. Cotton was up 9% from a much smaller base, obviously. And then wheat was basically flat. I think it was up 1% or so. So I guess the question is, obviously a lot changed in a lot of the grower minds, had to have over the last 3 months.
Sure.
Looking at that situation. I mean, again, you mentioned that the renewable diesel push, high fertilizer prices, the uncertainty with Ukraine, Russia. Are those all the factors that may have caused this shift to soybean to take place? Was it
Well,
one of them? Was it all of them? Or was there something else at play here in 2022? And more importantly, does it continue going into 23 if situations remain the same?
so Eric, if I knew the exact answer, I'd be on the beach in the mornings, playing golf in the afternoon, and having a really nice dinner every single night somewhere in a warm climate. That being said, let me try my best to answer your questions, which are spot on. Going into February, pre-war, pre-Ukraine war, there were a few interesting things going on. Fertilizer prices were indeed high. Ethanol production had been pretty robust, consuming more corn than people expected in the previous 8 months, and that generally has continued. However, we had a global vegetable oil shortage, tightening in there, and we had 6.5 billion gallons of renewable diesel capacity announced, all set to come on in 2025, 2026. So the reason I mention that is that's not insignificant. Based on our calculations, if all of the capacity gets built, 6.5 billion gallons of renewable diesel is going to consume 4.1 billion bushels of soybeans. Said differently, that's 98% of everything we grew in the soybean complex last year. And vegetable oil is tight for other purposes, food and to the extent oil is used for other industrial and feeding purposes. So the oil complex was tight to begin with, and I was going back and forth. The thing about being an analyst or an economist is you have to make a projection and you provide your rationale, but you expect sometimes to be wrong, oftentimes. So the universities, all the great land grant universities from KSU to Purdue to Iowa State, even Cornell, a lot of information came out that even with high fertilizer costs, the profit per acre of corn was still pretty darn good. So we went in, CoBank doesn't have to publish the estimate, so we didn't, but we went into this thinking there's probably more corn, more soybean, probably the tension on wheat pre-war was such that with the drought, we figured, wheat might come down, cotton obviously going up with the prices. Where we are today is we saw the print, and I think what the numbers you talked about were relative to a year ago. The numbers I talked about were relative to expectations, but we know where things are. It was a shortfall on corn, an upside surprise on soybeans. So there's some industrial logic to more soybeans, given the 5-year look on the demand for renewable diesel and the tight global veg oil market. There's also some industrial logic to corn because electric vehicles, less gasoline, obviously less ethanol, obviously less corn. So there's some logic there. But Eric, I'd be making it up if I didn't tell you that things could change between the survey and what actually gets in the ground in the next couple months. Corn, at least cash corn prices before we got on the call, we're getting close to $8 there. That's perhaps a big number, perhaps driven by the tighter supplies, such that I talked about with the Ukraine situation and the lower planning. Could that change? You bet it could change. There have been a lot of commentary about, the shift to more soybeans was 100% due to the high fertilizer costs. Again, I'm not so sure. I've been following ag for 10, 12 years. I've been following financial services plus ag plus 6 or 8 other industries in the S&P for the last 35 years. And sometimes there's a reason people give you, and then there's the real reason. We'll have to see what farmers believe to be the most profitable crop as they put product in the ground. But the universities continue to show that there's still very good profitability in corn. And I know from friends of mine in the business that actually bank and farm. The U.S. farmer, they love to plant corn. So there could be some variability and volatility there, and I expect there to be. So while I'm not sure exactly where the numbers go, I'm fairly confident that we're going to see volatility in current and futures prices as we get more clarity on what goes in the ground.
I was going to say, it's interesting to me because I remember the first time soybean acreage was higher than corn was back in the 1980s. And then it didn't happen again until 2018, but now it's 4 years later. And here we are again. I'm going to be curious to see if we actually could get 2 years in a row, perhaps, with soybean acreage is higher than corn. I think in that instance, then maybe we're on to a fundamental market shift, perhaps. But until that happens, I reserve judgment.
Eric, I'm with you, and we've known each other long enough to know that you have to be circumspect in these situations, and there's so many things you have to think about. One of the things I'll go off tangent here just for a minute, but one of the things that's fascinating is that 6.5 billion gallon of renewable diesel and the 4.1 billion bushels that you need to, in soybean that need to be feeding that machine. The screaming opportunity is, why doesn't anybody accelerate investment in soybean genetics, right? For God's sakes, the yield of a soybean acre versus the yield of a corn acre, 170 to 180 on corn, 45 to 55 on soybean. To me, that spells opportunity because you don't have enough land at, 50, 51, bushel per acre soybean yield to just expand. So why don't you focus on the genetics? There's another issue, which is a stubborn issue. Soybean on soybean is not that productive. So in terms of crop rotation, is there something different you can do? I'm not sure, but these are some of the things I'm thinking about, and we're doing deeper work on the global oil vegetable market, the global veg oil market to begin with, because again, the amount of percent of product, sunflower oil, that comes out of Ukraine, Russia together is gigantic. So that has to have an effect on, I think, the broader global grain complex.
Okay. Well, as I said at the top of our show here, Ken, this is part of our Retail Remedies series that we've been doing. So my question then, my final one to you before we dive into our quiz, is, what advice can you offer to ag retailers and their growers, customers here in 2022? Do they need to continue to look at changing their crop mix? Should they plan ahead 8 to 10 months versus 4 to 6 months? Should they have plan Bs in place that are quickly actionable, just in case their plan A doesn't look like it'll be viable anymore? All of the above. You tell me what pointer or two would you give the viewers trying to deal with all this uncertainty?
So Eric, with this accent and not growing up on a farm, I don't tend to give advice, because who's going to trust, somebody from the East Coast on planning a Midwest farm? That being said, let me offer a few thoughts. Some of the strategies and observations you made, I think, are spot on. But let me actually zero into maybe one or two things that are actionable. So what we have now, if we just step back and take a couple deep breaths, a little yoga session here to calm the mind and think, we have a situation where global supply chains, the recovery and the normalization of that, are gonna take much longer than we think. As we came into 2022, I thought that hopefully this year would be a year of perhaps an inflection point. With everything that's going on, supplies of all kinds are going to be tight, whether it be agrochemicals, fertilizer, seed seems to be quite available. But I think in terms of two major inputs, crop protection chemicals, fertilizer, and not to mention farm equipment that requires chips that are produced elsewhere, and steel that's often brought in from overseas, things are going to be quite tight for a while. So if there was ever a time to make sure that that you as a retailer had good visibility on product that you need and product that your customers need, It would be now. So I think whether you subscribe to the view that the entire industry needs to upgrade its ERP systems or become more data savvy, it's all of that. On a practical and a tactical level, I try to simplify it, right? You have short supply, you have limited supplies of chemicals, and again, the fertilizer situation we spent a lot of time talking about. If there was ever the business case for precision agriculture, it would be now. You may recall that last year, coming into getting on the other side of the 2021 harvest, I put together a research report where I articulated an interesting thesis about would it be good to develop precision advice as a service as opposed to just chemical sales and fertilizer sales. We're at that point where the grower, to the extent he or she is going to feel pain without the ability to have as much normal inputs that they need, could the retailer come in and really take a leadership position in helping the U.S. farmer adopt greater precision tools to apply only what they need to the field. In other words, let's forget about volume. Can we forget about volume and get paid to produce the very best crop with just the requisite amount of inputs in an environment where inputs are in short supply and expensive? So I would guide U.S. ag retailers to think about expanding the mind a little bit, to think about a different offering, a different service model, which is, again, getting paid for advice because they offer great advice rather than just focusing on the volume of product, which unfortunately is in jeopardy now. So that's kind of how I think about some of the themes that we talk about with CoBank clients.
Very good. All right.
You said
well, Ken,
Eric. I don't know if I'm ready for a quiz, Eric. It's been a tough interview so far.
Well, I'm sorry. Yeah, it's sort of a tradition. I know everybody I have on as a guest has to play the game. So it's
boy.
time, Ken, for
Okay.
fun with numbers. So again, as I said, Ken, you and I, we met 7 weeks ago, and a lot has changed in the world. So fun with numbers. Now, if you're not familiar with this, I'm going to hit you with a number, and then I'm going to give you 4 choices what that number may represent. So yes, get your pen ready.
I'm getting my pen ready, writing it down.
Okay, your number is 85%. Okay, so and keep current events in mind. So is 85%, here are your choices. A, that percentage of the Ukrainian crop mix that will be negatively impacted this year by the Russian invasion. B, is that the percentage of Argentinian grain volume that's transported by truck each year to the country's ports for export. C, is that the percentage of shipping containers being sent back to China empty during the first half of 2022? Or D, is that the percentage of excuses that I've rejected from my son when he said he can't mow the lawn this week?
Whew. Well, I got to tell you, it almost sounds like it's an all of the above type of thing. Eric, I don't know. I trust you on your son. We had been shipping a lot of empty containers out back to China, and I think that has stopped. So you're very clever. I think you said the first half of 2021, right? So that number is high. Argentina, how else do you get the grain to the port if not for truck? And then Ukraine, 85% of the crop being negatively impacted by the war. That's a very clever way to put it, because 85% of the crop will be affected. Whether it will be affected in a major way or a minor way, not sure. But I don't know. It sounds like you're playing a trick on me. It sounds like this 85 might show up in more than one category here. How did I do?
Actually, it's only one, so you do need to pick. So.
All right, just for safety, I'll say the China.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Ken. No, that number was closer to 50%, as was the 50 to 60% is the Ukrainian crop mix. No, the 85% is the amount of grain that Argentinian truck drivers transport from the fields to the country's ports. And then the reason that came up, of course, I read this morning that lo and behold, truckers in Argentina have gone on a strike because they would like higher rates for transporting the grain and a little bit more in the paycheck. So unfortunately, yeah, we have a grain issue now in Argentina. So
well, we knew that number was high because, like I said, how else are you going to get the grain from the field to the port? You're not going to do it by donkey. What's also interesting, though, if you don't mind me pontificating here for a minute,
please.
Missed the actual answer. You know, it's funny how the world works, right? People wondered why there were why the supply chain problem was going to persist in the U.S. We have many different answers, and then we also have the fact that the longshoremen are negotiating their contract this year. So what you just said with Argentina, boy, doesn't matter if you're Argentina truck driver, a Canadian railroad worker that obviously they were about to strike with the potash shortage happening, or the U.S. longshoremen. Interesting how the world works, isn't it? Separate from the geopolitical risks. So I hope they resolve that soon, because obviously those countries that need the grain really need it.
Yeah, no, and like I said, I just read that report this morning. That's why I figured it would be an interesting thing to put out there. But yeah, from what I'm from what I did read, apparently the strike has just happened as of Tuesday this week. We're recording this on Thursday. And at this point, there are no negotiations scheduled going forward. So this one, fortunately, sounds like it might last for a little while. So I have to keep an eye on it, obviously.
A question back for you. So
Sure.
Does your son give you excuses that you reject 100%, or is that only 50%? What's the answer?
No, because again, if he hits me with the excuse that he has a major test in one of his classes in the morning, I usually don't want to wear him out by making him do the lawn, mow the entire lawn. I don't have much, but it still takes a little more than an hour. So, if he's, like I said, if he hits me with the test excuse, I will let him get away with it. But if it's, my head hurts, my stomach hurts, my legs are achy, I'm like, you're 13, you can do this, go.
Excellent.
All right. Well, Ken, listen, I certainly appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for CropLife Retail Week. We hope you enjoyed it, viewers, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care.
Thanks very much, Eric. Take care.
If you have questions or comments about today's episode of Retail Week, contact us by email or Twitter, or type your message in the comment section below. Your feedback is important to us. We will try our best to address your thoughts in next week's episode, and be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel.